there's a lot of mistakes I made when it comes to where to put stuff, what kind of stuff to get, how to design the rooms. It's so many steps to doing things and decisions you have to make when you're trying to make a recording studio or build out your place you're going to mix or whatever you're doing. So let me give you some photos of past rooms I was in, and that'll also kind of help guide me down what to discuss and what I remember being a mistake and not. If you check this out, right, this is a room I mixed in for a long time. Now this room, you could tell based on the gear set, it's very limited. You know, I gathered this stuff up over time. This is the Allen and Heath console I mentioned before, which is basically a live console, but it's very old, from like the 80s. So it was built like a tank. This thing weighs a ton. And it doesn't have any built-in effects, but the mic pre's are pretty good on it. So I basically wound up buying these 6 channels of Neve here, these 5432s. And the improvement in sound quality was pretty good, considering, you know, this is a much higher quality build than these were. But that doesn't mean that the Allen and Heath is a bad thing by any means. And that's the thing, you use what you have. But over time, the first piece of gear I actually bought is this thing on the bottom left, the DMP 1073. That was so helpful to making things sound good. And at this point, I already had my buddy who's a pedal builder. I had him build a 1073 for me, which was kind of like a project that, you know, he wanted to undertake, and, you know, he hooked me up building the thing. And at the end of it, the parts included, like, we bought a ton of parts off Mauser, and we got basically the schematics of the thing, and he built it. And it wound up costing pretty close to what the BAE 1073 without EQ on it costs. And, you know, at the end of it, I remember thinking, it's not really worth it, because you don't really save that much. You know, maybe it would have been worth it if we built like 24 of them or something, you know, over enough time, maybe the savings adds up. But on one or something, it really doesn't make any sense. But it sounds really good, the one he built, and it really does sound exactly like the BAE one. I mean, the differences are minor, and one day maybe I'll do a video comparing the two. But anyway, just wanted to show you here. Big problems with this setup that I had. I didn't have any room treatment on the walls at all. That was a big problem. Also, and this is going to be a common theme you're going to notice, where the desk is in this situation, the desk is right up against the wall. Reason being, this room wasn't very big. So in order to get as much space as I could, I pushed the desk right up against the wall. The biggest problem with that, and I'm going to flip through some stuff, I want to, like, just to show you this. This is where I'm at now before it was built. So as you see this, you'll notice this is just a basement with nothing in it except for the framing of the stairway, basically, was all that was in it. This was it. So that just an empty basement. And this is where, you know, this became my control room. And then the back room was the live room. And then I flipped them. But this was the place as it looked when I moved into it. And this room right here, we built a vocal booth out of. None of this framing was here. We created that. But the framing that you see to the right of it, that was all there because that was basically a laundry room that was like half built before I ever did anything. So it had the framing for the stairway built, and it had this framing for this laundry room built. But the rest of it was open. So these windows that are being cut here, this is all new stuff that we added. But that pole that you see right in the middle, the bane of my existence, man. And as we go, like, so I just wanted to kind of show you, this is, then we put in the walls. Now, the windows being staggered like that, I consider this to be a mistake. At the time, I thought it made sense to, like, have, basically, because of the way the rooms, like, because of this inside gap that I created for storage, it made sense in theory to do a big window in this bigger spot and then a lower window in the lower spot. But if it's just one piece of glass connecting this one side, at least the view between one room to the other would have been a little better. So in hindsight, I wouldn't do this again with this middle section. I would have just made this one window, even if the other side was a jagged wall. It wasn't straight. So even if that side was the way it was, I still would have made this one solid window. But, you know, at the time, we did it this way because I thought it made sense, but it doesn't. So that was something that I would do differently. All these walls that you're looking at, by the way, this is 5/8 of an inch sheetrock. It's not the like the thinner stuff. It's the thick stuff. And everything you're looking at double 5/8 on each side of the wall. In addition, there were these RSIC clips, these resilient clips that basically had springs in them to basically make it where vibrations did not transfer from one room to another. Typically, if you just build right on the studs, everything just goes, from, if the vibration in the room is severe enough, it vibrates the drywall, which vibrates the studs, which then vibrates the drywall on the other side of the studs, which then gets to the other room. So the point is, RSIC clips are these clips that you hang on the studs, and then it keeps the drywall off it. It makes a difference, all right? That, and, that's the biggest difference maker, and those things are all through this place. And if you notice, too, you could kind of see the depth of these windows. Because of the double 5/8 on each side and, the resilient clips, it creates more space. So you have basically more, it's not wall on wall. It becomes a big gap in between each wall. And then you fill this with this sound isolation stuff. I forget what it was called exactly, sound silencer or something. And we basically put that to fill these window openings. But the point is, you're dealing with thick at that point. It's not just wall on wall. And again, 2 layers of 5/8 on each side, and then those clips on each side. We really went to town. So let's keep moving. This is what a panel was looking like when it was being built, and these were wrapped really well. Just attention to detail, where there's a frame built inside it. There's a frame on both sides, and then inside it is the Owens Corning 703 4-inch, and then we wrapped the Guilford of Maine fabric around the entire thing, and then put really nicely put the corners together, and then staple gunned it all throughout. So that's how we built all these. And this is one of the ceiling clouds, most likely. It's either that or it was one of the gobos. But this right here was us building the diffusers. Now, this is me, my buddy Nick, my buddy Matt, and I took a photo of it, but this was a gluey mess. All this stuff, you can see the glue down here we were gluing all these pieces, which we had in these boxes. I had them cut ahead of time, and we just hung out, put these, basically, this is like, if you see that they're all mounted on this board that's only I don't know, 1/4 inch thick, 1/2 inch thick kind of thing of plywood, basically. And then we mounted this stuff to it. It needs to be substantial enough to hold some weight, because these blocks are not heavy. They're not light. They're wood blocks glued to this board in the pattern that we all had on I printed everybody a piece of paper so we could see what to do where, and we had to sand these blocks and then glue them down pretty much, because there was jagged pieces cut off. If you've ever cut a ton of wood like this before, it's not always clean cuts. You got these little splinter things sticking out, so we sanded them off and then glued them down, and we each did one, so that at the end of it, I did an extra one. So there's 4 of these that I built. 2 of these exist behind me on the back wall, and 2 in the other room on the wall. But I would have built more, but they were such a pain to build. So this is another thing where it's easier and quicker to buy them, but we put in the work, and we sit down and did it. And then I spray painted them black to make them significantly cooler. But I didn't do that till much later, when I did the ceiling. I did those. So as we can see now, we've hung up some of the panels on the walls and on the ceiling up here. We've framed out the window things. So the panels started going up everywhere. The corners completely taken out. As I've mentioned in the last video, the corners don't mean a whole lot. It is true that the corners are something, but if you look at the percentage of your wall, you want the wall to mostly be absorption. Just taking out the corners doesn't mean now you magically cured your base issues. That's just a percentage of the rest of the room. You need to do a lot of the room in order to get significantly good results. Now, this is the other room. So now, just to give you a sense of what I was explaining, this room right here is where I am currently sitting. This panel is what I'm currently facing, the thing behind the drum set, because this room is now my control room. But at the time, I had it done in reverse. And the reason I switched, I'll show you as I start getting closer towards the desk pictures. But this room is now the control room. And this was something that didn't happen that long ago. a year and a half, 2 years, something like that, I switched into this room. But prior to that, I was in the other room the whole time. So as we flip through the pictures, you'll see like this was really close to after it was all installed. Everything, by the way, the switches and all that, it's all surface mounted because I kind of like that industrial vibe. I didn't want to hide the switches and hide the, put everything in the walls. Like I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to go like, industrial style where it's just everything's surface mounted. So flipping through, this is for about a 6 months or so. I had these colored lights that were like, either the Philips or some Amazon knockoff version of that, doing the colored lights in all the light fixtures. And when those bulbs died, I just didn't do more of that because I was like, kind of lame. But this is from the view from the other direction. You can see two of the diffusers over there. But this was an okay live room. It wasn't bad. It's just I felt like it would be more conducive towards a control room. And, it might be. The thing is with stuff like this is you never really try both with everything set up in the same way. Like you're not going to move your desk back and forth. You're really not. So once I committed to moving into this room, I just committed to moving and I never tried the other room again. But in hindsight, I'll show you in a second. I'll show you this is why, because this is the other room. Now, like I said, this is the bigger room, which is now my live room. And this pole is in my life. And I was like, I cannot wait to get this thing out of my life. In addition, the speakers, okay, what you'll learn, the more you learn about acoustics, is that you want your speakers as close to the wall as possible to prevent an out of phase sound from the low end. Basically, it doesn't go directionally. The low end will go all around you. And once it leaves the speakers, it winds up hitting the back wall later and basically canceling itself out, because by the time it's now coming forward with the signal that's also coming forward, it winds up being totally out of phase in a way that's very destructive to the sound. The closer you get the speakers to the wall, the better it is. The problem with a setup like this is because it's pushed up against this wall, and at this time I didn't have any speaker stands, so I wound up using desks covered in this black tablecloth kind of thing, pushed up against the wall. The problem is this is not conducive to cleaning. And you have to think about that. Like, no matter how you look at it, what I've learned from all making mistakes like this kind of thing, I've learned that no matter what, my desk, I don't know if you could tell in the video I did last time, but my desk is off the wall by a few feet. And what I realized is that's not even enough. So take into account what I was saying about the speakers. You want your speakers as close to the wall as possible. But that doesn't mean your desk needs to be right up against the wall. I personally like the desk far enough away that I can get behind the desk with a vacuum, with a broom, with a tripod for a camera, with lights for a camera. Like, especially if you're thinking about doing any sort of videos or anything, you need to account for this, and being able to put a tripod, maybe a few things, a tripod, a subwoofer, some lights, get a vacuum back there, be able to climb around behind your stuff to plug stuff in. Because think about it, I have a desk now, it has racks on both sides, and you need to be able to get behind it to get to the racks, to be able to plug stuff in and out. And it just becomes impossible when you're pushed up against a wall. So what happened over a long enough time, years like this, dirt, dust, all sorts of stuff would build up in places I could never get to. And that is terrible. So if you could help it, pull your stuff away from the wall. And I'm not talking about the speakers, I'm talking about the desk, to be able to get behind it. So you could walk around the thing, so you could vacuum, so you could move stuff, so you could put a tripod, lights, all sorts of stuff behind your desk. That's critical. All right. And I can't stress it enough. You see what I mean? You have no idea how dirty and grimy and gross it got behind my speakers. So crazy. Because after a long enough time and you can never get back there, what do you expect? So, terrible idea. In hindsight, terrible idea. So this all combined with that pole was like, man, I got to get out of there. So you can see behind me, I had couches set up at one point, and this door was, I had this plastic covering it because in the winter it got pretty cold. So before I wound up repairing it, I basically just plasticed it all up. And this is what we got. So, the live, this is the vocal booth in the back over there. And this panel, if you notice, I mentioned it in the video, this thing was messed up from jump. It was like the thing in the inside slid to the left and we never really got it straightened out. So that's why it's got this weird like Z in it. But anyway, so that's this, room in its original setup. And boy, was that pole annoying to me. I would bang into it when I'd forget about it. My elbow would hit it. I would constantly be thinking that I'm hearing this reflection from the pole. What a mess. So getting away from that pole was huge. If I was going to go back into this room, which I'm not planning on, but if I was, I would back everything up so the pole was like at the front left of the desk, like I don't know, it'd still be bad, but I'd back up to get that thing at least in front of me so it wasn't next to me anymore. That thing was awful. I was considering calling the studio Unfortunate Pole Studios for a long time. That was actually, I think that was Matt's idea. It was a good name he came up with, Unfortunate Pole Studios. Got to credit him for it. So, all right. So this is just, Patch Bay talking about, I'm just talking about, here's another thing. Make sure, if you notice where this patch bay is, I had to climb behind this thing in order to mess with this, and there wasn't a lot of play to be able to turn it sideways or anything. So now my patch bay exists on wheels. I strongly recommend wherever you put a patch bay, make sure you can wheel it out from wherever it is to comfortably get behind it to do what you need to do. Because that's one thing. The more gear you get, the more you're patching stuff in. And I added more and more of these bays. How many is it here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only have 6, so I didn't add a ton, but I have 6 bays. And then these ones at the bottom, I'm not counting those. But 6 of these 1/4-inch things, and like I've mentioned before, the 1/4-inch is a big pain, honestly, because the TT, it's just I don't want to buy new cables for stuff, and I had a lot of these TRS cables, so I went with this. But in hindsight, it takes up less space to use TT, and if the back is DB25, it's much easier to plug stuff in with DB25s than it is to put 1/4-inch everywhere. So that's one thing that I would do different if I could, again, from scratch. I'd start with TT instead of TRS. But yeah, very limited setup in terms of gear, and it was working just fine, and I actually was summing in through this console for a long time, because why not? I had 16 outs on the Apogee converters going out, and I sent them right in here, and I would, just sort of sum together. Now this, for a very short time, I had a Pro Control. When I say short time, I mean short, man. I had not long at all, because you could probably guess why. Look at this ridiculous pole situation. So I was like, man, this ain't gonna work, and I got rid of that thing. But I had a great deal on it, and I was like, I might as well try this thing out, and I just wound up not keeping it. Return policy came in clutch on that one. But I had to add a desk to fit this whole Pro Control on it, but it wasn't good, so I got rid of it. But that's, an old school Pro Tools controller, and that got subbed out for what you can see in front of me here, these Avid Artist mixes. Now, this kind of a setup, because I was like, oh, great, instead of the pole, I'll just put it around in a circle, and that way, I'll group it so like my reverbs and delays are on the left, and my, I was like, I'll come up with something. In actuality, this kind of turned view was totally unusable in practice. So I'm just saying, like, this was a terrible idea, okay? It wasn't good. And I can't notice here, Event 2020s, and now the NS10s show up. So, I built this over time, little by little, and the NS10s showed up around the same time the Avid Artist mixes showed up. And I always found those Avid Artist mixes very hard to use. It was never as intuitive as I wanted, and I never really got any pleasure out of using them, and I sold them all. So I got, almost what I paid for them, because I bought them used and I sold them used. So, I mean, that kind of thing. It didn't really hurt me too much to wind up using them for years, but again, it wasn't a good experience. So just flipping through. So yeah, hard drive wise, everybody should be getting good quality hard drives. Today it's probably better than it used to be, but I had a couple hard drives go down on me that were like Western Digitals, and I never went back. I use Glyphs now almost exclusively. Glyphs and the Lacy drives was what I used for years, and now I'm solely using Glyphs. That's the view to the control room from the vocal booth. And when this was set up in this way, like that was how I designed it, was the vocal booth looks into the control room so you can, you know, be looking at the person singing or like, and that was helpful. Now, the way I have the studio set up, it's actually even better for certain things. Like mainly if you're trying to have a band play together, the room being bigger is easy to put 3 or 4 people playing together in this big room where they could all listen and be watching and have visual cues and be standing in the same room. So you get that live feel, and you can do like what the Doors used to do, which is separate Jim Morrison off into a vocal booth that can see the live room. And the way it is now, the vocal booth looks into the live room. So the vocal booth's looking at everyone too. So it's like the band is together, but you get isolation on the singer so he can essentially record a better vocal performance without bleed of all the instruments in the mic. So this winds up being helpful for that. But again, I mentioned also, it's not something I do all the time at all. You know, it's rare, but when it happens, it's nice to have that. The vocal booth in the live room I found to be more useful, because when you're recording a singer and it's just you and them in the control room, a lot of people just have the vocalist sing in the control room. You don't even need to separate it out. I mean, that's what Cult does. That's what a lot of people do. So what else we got? So this is just showing you kind of different angle, same stuff, different angle. There's a MIDI keyboard over here too. I rarely use the MIDI keyboard because I don't play keyboard particularly. Like I just mess around when I need to get something done, but I'm not a keyboardist by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, you can see the ceiling clouds. The angular cloud here was good, but again, it occurred to me, I was like, there's no treatment behind these things at all. That can't be good. So I wound up switching, because now where I'm at, I've got treatment behind my speakers and everything, and I thought it would make more sense. In hindsight, I'm not so sure that it did, because I do remember, I mean, just from a low-end perspective, the low end was tighter in this room than it is where I am now. I mean, it's just, it was more directional and more easily heard. Somebody asked me on a video, they said, I think it was the last video or the one before it, they said, is it worth getting a Trinnov if, and they're in their comment, and it was a substantial amount of like, you know, specifics about their room. If this is only a plus or minus, you know, you're only 2 dB bump here, all the specifics. The answer to the question has nothing to do with the specifics of your room. A Trinnov or something like that that corrects the room will always make your speakers perform better. They will always make what you're hearing in your listening position a better listening experience. It's just a question of, can they do enough based on what you have at the moment? So I always look at it like it's worth buying that no matter what. It controls what you're listening to. There's never a good place to be like, my room's good enough, I don't need it. In my opinion, you should always be getting that, something like that. It only helps. And then if it doesn't help enough, you fix your room more. But the point is, you need room correction stuff. You can't get one or the other. It's not like a Trinnov takes the place of room treatment, and it's not like room treatment will take the place of the Trinnov. Like, no matter how you look at it, you're going to want that little bit better. It helps. And it does things also, like makes sure your speakers are both lined up, hitting you at the same time. If one happens to be slightly off, you know, from the other one in terms of the angle or the distance, it will correct things like that. So no matter how you look at it, it's going to make things better in your listening position, no matter how you look at it. So I would always recommend getting something like that, and not promotion or there's no paid advertisement or promotion or anything. It's just, why not? That everything comes down to how you hear, every single thing. So if you could afford it, you should get it. If you can't afford it, then don't get it. And just do what everybody did until those were invented, which is try to get it as good as you can. And then with that, it'll be a little better. Doesn't matter how good your room is, or really how bad it is. I would say you need both, room treatment and something like that, in my opinion. That's obviously in my opinion. You could get away with, you don't need both, but why not get both? Because that will make a bigger difference than like a new compressor will, in my opinion. It's how you hear. It's how you hear. So the better you can hear, the better you can mix. Now, just different, just some other photos of some setups when we recorded some people, and I had some people singing at the same time, some keyboard stuff. That's a Rhodes. It's the original Rhodes I mentioned before. Some violin happening. This was a session where I had a bunch of people playing in the control room. A lot of times I'll do that. It's easy for me to, when I'm like a part of the session, I like a lot, like put the drummer alone in the room playing drums and put the rest of the guys in the control room. The drummer doesn't usually like that, but at least that way you can sort of direct the show better without using the talk to everyone. But if the band wants to be together, then they could be together. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about having both rooms. And it's really all about what the band wants to do. A lot of these were built by my buddy Matt, and he built some sick pedals. This is a particularly cool, like, it's like a tube screamer and an overdrive, like 2 steps in one pedal kind of thing. That thing's a house in terms of size. It's pretty cool though. Really, really cool sounding. He had a bunch of pedals he built. The coolest one, in my opinion, was this bass fuzz. It was so cool. It was this bass fuzz pedal that I still love on everything. And I've yet to find a pedal that sounds exactly like that. And he built that one from scratch. That's not me, but it's somebody who looks kind of like me, sort of, on some alternate. We got, just different angles, different people playing drums. We got some sax. So sometimes I use this middle room as an additional isolation room, because in this way we had the drums by themselves and the bass player was in the room with the drummer because he's playing direct, so there's no sound in the room. There wasn't a bass amp in the room. The sax was in the middle, and I was in this room singing into this mic, so we were able to get sort of isolation on the vocal mic, isolation on the sax mic, and then, isolation on the drums by having the 3 separate rooms. And we were able to have line of sight by doing it this way. Instead of, if I'm not mistaken, the guitar is in the vocal booth, the amp mic'd up. So that allowed for all of that. Just the vocal booth in action. We've got some other stuff. That's from one of my videos for Alien Disco stuff. This was some Sage clearing stuff. So we packed everybody into this live room here to record, just everybody in this narrow room. And I've played in tiny practice rooms. If you've ever been in a city and you've paid per hour to practice, that they could put you in a practical closet and you got 4 people or 5 in there trying to live. And that happens. So we got, it's just a bunch of stuff. Just flip through this. So once we started, now you'll see some accumulation of some gear happen. So I started to get some better stuff. We got the Fusion shows up. This Master Bus Converter, this Neve one, this thing, I actually tried them both out, the Dangerous and the Master Bus Converter, and preferred the Dangerous. Just happened to like it better. And gave back the Master Bus Converter. That thing didn't last long, but the Fusion stuck around. The 5060 shows up, and the Clarity shows up. Now, this thing I could not live without. Could not live without this thing. Also, at some point, these stands showed up, these ISO acoustic stands. I recommend those, but I also recommend not using a desk because, again, you box yourself in like this, you're going to be living in Dust Bowl City pretty soon. If you ever saw the movie Interstellar, it's pretty much like that, just covered in dust everywhere. And if you haven't seen the movie Interstellar, what are you doing, man? You should. So then, shortly after this, we switch over to this room. The Argosy desk shows up. Now, just a real quick thing on the desks. I'm a huge fan of work. Like, I cannot ever go back to working on a surface that doesn't have a freaking armrest now, because you don't realize how often your freaking elbows are on the table all the time. And beyond that, the ability to stay in the sweet spot and tweak things is, it cannot be, undersold. It's such a good idea to be able to sit and be able to touch things. I also happen to like the desks with the flat center, so you can put something like, the 5060 on in the middle without having racks in the way. That's the kind of desk I like, is always going to be a desk like that, because it also allows you to have a lower screen than you would have to have if it was behind racks. That's really the reason I don't love the Genesis desk so much, the Danger Fox Genesis, the one that basically has the 3 racks. The one with the space in the middle is great, but it's a fortune. The way to buy desks, if you ask me, is always used on Reverb or eBay, or some place where you're going to go pick it up, because that's one of those things where if you own one of these desks, there's always going to be somebody who wants to come grab it from you, and you'll take less than you bought it for. If you buy these things new, they're like $4,000. And if you buy them used, you could spend $1,500 on the same desk this thing costs like $4,500 new, this desk. And I did not buy it new. I bought it used for about $15,000. And that's what I'm saying. These are like, I wound up also getting lucky with this desk because of a few reasons. This particular desk has space behind the racks where you can actually see whatever's plugged in there relatively easily. And that's something that a lot of desks, for some reason, are built with closed backs. And it's not something I even realized until recently, when I started investigating a desk for a potential mix room in another location, and I realized that it doesn't have an open back. Like, the rack area is kind of covered behind it. And I thought to myself, why? Why on earth? The Argosy Halo desk is particularly like minimal, like bare bones kind of desk. It's not a bad desk. And the thing I like about it is because the rack behind it is open. Because it's open, it doesn't hide the wires and things, but everything in audio is a trade-off. Because it doesn't hide the wires, you can get to all the connections very easily. So there's positives and there's negatives. The wires are, you can see the hole behind the gear, behind everything. You see your wires hanging, but at the same time, you can get to it. Whereas when they hide the desks, like an Argosy Dual 15, for example, it makes it really hard to get to the stuff. And it's not even something I ever considered until, I sat there with an Argosy Dual 15 going, what is going on? And that's not what this is. This is a different kind of desk. I just never imagined they'd be built any way but this after having this desk. And then when I picked up this Dual 15 for this other room, which I'll show you in another video, the progress, how that's going to go down. But once I picked up this desk, I thought everything was built smart like that. And then I looked at the Dual 15 and I'm like, man, it's really difficult to get to the behind this thing. Really difficult. So anyway, that's where we're at. Bunch of different, these are good photos from another buddy of mine, Dan Babcock, came through with the great photos. This is all Dan Babcock photography here, and the dude is thorough. And we basically have, oh, here's another thing. As cool as I thought it looked for about a day, these the panels, like the LED lights that light up behind the panels, man, cheese city, if you ask me. Like, in hindsight, I hate it. Like, I thought I liked it. I thought it was cool. I no longer think it's cool, and it's not something I would ever do again. I think the move, if you can help it, is always put lights in a ceiling cloud, for example. If you can, if you're buying ceiling clouds, make sure you get them with lights in them. If you saw Colt Caparoon's videos with the lights in his ceiling clouds, they look great. A lot of companies now, when you buy ceiling clouds and things, they offer lights. Make sure you get them, because dealing with lighting when your ceiling's blocked off with a ceiling cloud becomes very difficult, and you don't want to do cheesy things like this, in my opinion. To each his own. Everybody's got their own taste. I just wouldn't do it in hindsight. There's no shot I would do that again. This is just another angle of the room. And, that is all for these photos. This is my lighting setup. These 3 lights came in a package, and then I put the one behind me, and that's how I, get her done in terms of being able to light myself both from the front and from the back, so I can have that back lit up, separate me from the background type of deal. But, I hope that sort of cleared up some things. The thing about the desk doesn't sound major, but it is. Keep it away from the wall enough to get behind it, and make sure you buy a desk that allows you to get to the behind it. Because the only workaround for that is to do what I've learned how to do, since, which is basically you have to have ample extra cable that you basically pull through and plug everything in, like plug your gear in, like holding it outside the desk. You sit it on the desk, you plug everything in, then you mount it in the desk. But that still doesn't solve your problem, if you need to change something behind it when you don't want to take it out. So in other words, to take it out now, because you have that slack, you can pull it out of the desk, and then you'll still be able to get it out, but your wires could move. They could get tied on other wires. It could be tight, and then all of a sudden you can't do that anymore. And you still got to reach your arm in there and unplug stuff before you can get stuff out, and then you're in a world of hurt. So, these things, this patch bay is on wheels. That's what I was referring to. That's the other biggest thing there is. Make sure if you have a patch bay that it's on wheels so I can roll it out and get behind it, stand there like a person, or put a chair there and sit and then make stuff happen. Now, if I could do anything, I'd pull this whole setup back 4 feet or so, because it wouldn't make a difference. It might mess the line of sight up a little bit, which is the reason I didn't do it, because I could see right at the drummer. But I'd like to be able to get behind this desk, and I don't have as many feet as I would want. I'm short about 1.5 feet, 2 feet behind that desk. Not a whole lot, but enough where I'd like to have more space back there if I could. Okay. Also, some people will say, yeah, but then your speakers will be further from the wall. That's true. Don't put your speakers on your desk. Like, no matter what, I would say speakers go on stands, just like the Barefoots are on stands, and push them against the wall or back up against that wall to prevent from the sound basically hitting the wall late, and then not, creating a phase issue between the front sound coming out of the speaker and then the bounce off the wall sound, because that will mess stuff up for you. So every room is different. That's another thing why, if anybody ever asks and says like, will this work or whatever, there's never going to be anybody who could tell you the answer. There's no way to know that until you try it and take measurements before and after. There's no way to know if spending $15,000 is going to be enough to treat your room, or if you're going to need 20, or if 10 would have been fine, or 5 would have been fine. There's like no way to know. All I could tell you is you're going to need to spend more probably than you think to achieve something that's particularly spectacular sounding. If you're just going for better than crap, you can get away with it for a little bit, but ideally you don't have to do it all at once. You could do it in stages, and you could keep improving it to try to get the response you're looking for when you take measurements. If there's some serious issue, you will correct it. But because every room has anomalies, like because I have this ridiculous, like this wall isn't straight to my right, it's wider here and then it gets a little narrower, that creates like a pseudo corner in a way that messes with things. The LVL creates this weird pseudo corner that messes with things. The fact that this is, the cinder creates a different problem that wouldn't be there if it was a drywall. The fact that the ceiling is, open, and I decided to get the ceiling height, but it has those joists in it and creates these like bays between the joists. Like, that is another thing. Like, all this stuff matters, all of it, whether you have carpet or whether you have a wood, this kind of like fall wood floor kind of thing. Like, it's all the same, like, the opposite of it's all the same. It's all going to be different depending on every bit of your situation. So I just want people to know that if you think there's some way you're always going to be able to know by spending this, you get this as a result, you don't. You'll never know. So take the risk or don't. But just realize you could think about it for 10 years and never come up with the right answer, because everything you predict is going to be different as soon as you get the stuff and put it in. You won't know until you actually take measurements. All you could do is make educated guesses on assumptions of usually this something. That's it. And that's why you do things like put the speakers closer to the wall, because then all the research says that should be better than further from the wall. But in your case, in your specific case, based on something else and all these other anomalies that we're not taking into account, maybe it would be slightly different for some other reason. And that's the thing where you have to sort of leave yourself open to that. And that's why this business is so unique, because no matter what you do with a mix, like, it's subjective. Do you like it better, or does this guy like it better, or does this guy like it better? Depending on whose ears are listening, there's not one answer that this is always better. So it really comes down to understanding what you like, your taste, honing your taste, and then just trying to develop the skill set to be able to achieve your taste. That's this whole business. And because there's no right or wrong for taste, man, you're in this swimming sea of, I wonder. I'll never know for sure. I wonder. So enjoy that. Embrace it, because it's never going to be any different. All right? I hope this made some sense. I hope you liked it. Leave a comment. Hit the like button if you dug it. Subscribe if you haven't. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. Leave a question or comment about something you want me to make a video about, because I'm pulling from then. Everything you guys write, that's where I'm pulling from to create these videos now. So I appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.